In the icy waters of the Arctic and subarctic lives a fascinating marine mammal, the beluga whale. But the beluga or white whale still holds some mystery for us. We know very little about their habitats, behavior, and how they live. Even their number, considered to be somewhere between 80,000 and 150,000 individuals, is difficult to estimate. In recent years, the global scientific community has been concerned about the rapid decline in certain beluga populations. In 2017, the belugas of the St. Lawrence River were officially declared to be at risk of extinction by the Canadian government. Despite measures to protect them, the belugas continue to shrink in number, but we don't know why. In Canada, Russia, and Alaska, scientists have undertaken a wide-reaching investigation to discover the root causes of this situation. What is happening in the St. Lawrence River? Is it a unique case? Or is it an indication of what is to come for the belugas across the Arctic? Robert Michaud is one of the world's leading experts on beluga whales. For the past 30 years, he has dedicated his life to studying them in the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. Robert Michaud is seeing major changes in the river, and he's worried for the whales.
If this population were in good health, it would have doubled since we started studying it in the early 1980s. But that's not happening. The population is now in decline and has perhaps been that way for perhaps a decade now. But the reasons for that decline are a mystery to us.
Tadoussac is a village in the heart of the St. Lawrence whale's summer residence. At dawn in the season, a boat leaves the port well before those carrying tourists to observe these marine mammals. On board are Robert Michaud, biologist Véronique Lesage, and technician Michel Moison. They spend hours looking for the pods.
60 to 80 belugas between 30. They're fine specimens. Some of them are pretty big, nice and white.
Belugas are social animals that can live up to the age of 80. Their interactions are complex. They have a highly developed means of communicating. No other cetacean, no other marine mammal is as vocal as the beluga. They talk to one another so much that they've been nicknamed the canary of the seas. Today, there are 29 recorded beluga populations around the world. They are spread across circumpolar regions at latitudes between 47 degrees north and 80 degrees north, in the waters of Norway, Russia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. The St. Lawrence population is isolated. At the start of the 20th century, there were some 10,000 in this river. Today, there are just 900. And their number continues to fall, despite beluga hunting ending almost 40 years ago. What is the reason behind this decline? On the river, Robert Michaud, Véronique Lesage, and Michel Moison want to remove a little subcutaneous fat from the whales in order to biopsy them. They want to establish the number of gestating females.
There they are. We were going a little too fast.
It's like a pregnancy test in the great outdoors. They're exploring one of the hypotheses that might explain the decline of this population.
We did a major review in 2007 to try to understand why the belugas weren't re-establishing themselves. And there were lots of indications to suggest a problem with reproduction. Is it because the females aren't falling pregnant? Is it because once they are pregnant, they abort and the young don't survive? There are many questions to answer, but we need to tackle them systematically. So we decided to address this issue by starting at the beginning. Are the females conceiving? And that's what we're checking now. Based on other studies, we suppose that around 1/3 of female belugas should fall pregnant each year. The aim of this project is to determine if that is the case. And if that is the case, then that's normal, and the problem must be elsewhere.
For the scientists, the issue of maintaining the population is becoming increasingly worrying. They have seen an increase in the mortality of females and juveniles. At the Quebec Marine Mammals Emergencies Network, there are more and more alerts coming in. Specialists are on hand each time a dead beluga is washed up on the coast. And they are sometimes called in to save live belugas that are also washed up on the shore.
There's an incident right now at Rivière du Loup. There's a young beluga that has been washed up alive. A team will be arriving in the next few hours to rescue the animal and try to get it back into the water. I'm looking for volunteers.
The belugas found like this are young. They suckle for the first 2 years after their birth and are thus incapable of living without their mothers.
The intervention is based on a reasonable hypothesis that in a complex society like the belugas, females may adopt an orphaned young. This has been observed, very rarely, with other species. There have been rare incidences in related species, such as dolphins. We've never seen it with belugas, but since 2008, we decided to take our chances.
The young belugas are put back out to sea within a pod. Robert Michaud doesn't know if they will survive, but the situation is so dramatic that they must try everything. Since 2008, the number of dead newborns found on the shore each year has been 6 times higher than during any of the 25 previous years. 2016 was a catastrophic year. 16 corpses were found, those of 6 newborns, 3 juveniles, and 7 adult females.
At the same time as we documented a decline in the beluga population, we saw a very marked increase in the mortality of newborns and a new type of mortality amongst females, perinatal mortality, dying just before, during, or after giving birth. So a large part of our efforts today are focused on understanding this phenomenon. Why the increase in mortality amongst newborns, and why this new type of mortality amongst females?
The veterinary medicine faculty of the University of Montreal has a new corpse, that of an adult female. To understand why the belugas are dying, Stéphane Lair has autopsied around 230 of the 500 cadavers discovered on the banks of the St. Lawrence River over the past 35 years. This pathologist has noted a lowering in the average age of the dead females. He's also noticed that the many deaths were caused by complications during labor. Up until 2007, just 10% of females were pregnant when they died. But from 2011 onwards, this went up to almost 60%.
The interesting thing here with the uterus is that there are 2 horns, and you can see fairly clearly here that there is an asymmetry in terms of the horns. And that is an indication that she gave birth within the last 3 weeks. So the big question we must ask ourselves is whether that birth was linked to her death. And I think the answer is yes. In the late 2000s, we started to see an increase in what are known as dystocia. A dystocia is a complication during birth. The female gives birth during the summer and she has a problem. She can't deliver the calf and she dies. Or, in some circumstances, she can deliver the calf after a very complicated birth, and the calf is very weak and will probably find it harder to follow its mother, and that will reduce its chances of survival. Birthing complications in wild animals are extremely rare, and with belugas, especially since the end of the 2000s, if you have young females dying, if you have calves that are dying, that's the recruitment potential for the future population. So it's a real problem.
Females dying during labor, newborns left to fend for themselves and cannot. How can we explain this phenomenon? Scientists are growing increasingly interested in the quality of water in the river. The St. Lawrence is the main maritime channel in North America, linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. It connects the big North American industrial cities of Chicago, Detroit, and Buffalo, Toronto, and Montreal to the rest of the planet. Urbanization, industrialization, and agriculture are putting constant pressure on the river, even if the belugas mainly live downstream in the area around Tadoussac, open into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In Montreal, 500 kilometers upstream from Tadoussac, ecotoxicologist Jonathan Véraud is examining the impact of toxic contaminants on animal life in the river. The belugas of St. Lawrence, at the top of the food pyramid, are particularly badly affected.
The main contamination problem for belugas is in terms of fat-soluble organic compounds that accumulate in their body fat. And because belugas build up a lot of fat, they build up a lot of contaminants throughout their lives, starting with their development in their mother's womb and also via maternal transfer through the milk, which amplifies the contamination amongst very young belugas who start their lives with a fairly complex cocktail of contaminants, which is added to throughout their lives.
Could the water quality be responsible for these unusual deaths observed in the river? The scientists have seen that the belugas of St. Lawrence are 10 times more contaminated by flame retardants than the other beluga populations. Flame retardants, or PBDEs, are added to furniture or electronic materials to minimize the risk of fire. They can be found in the wastewater from towns and villages along the St. Lawrence River. Despite the fact that they were banned in the mid-2000s, they continue to accumulate in the animals' bodies. It is likely they have a negative impact on beluga births.
We know that thyroid hormones are involved in that process, in addition to other hormones. So it's possible that the levels of PBDE, which are very high in the belugas, play a role in terms of regulating hormone levels in these belugas, and that could have an impact on the reproductive capacity of that population.
Other observations made in Belgium on the effects of chemical contamination on another species of cetacean sheds additional light on the problem. Many porpoises, marine mammals from the same family as belugas, were found washed up on the shores of the North Sea, which is highly polluted, like the St. Lawrence. Vet Thierry Joniot autopsied them all. He counted the scars marking the female's ovaries, with each scar corresponding to a birth.
What you notice is that some female porpoises have very low birth rates and very high pollutant levels. Each time a female gestates, each reproductive cycle leaves a scar, and in theory this scar remains for the entire lifetime of the animal. And we have seen that some adult females have very few scars and demonstrate very high pollutant levels, while inversely, there are females with a great number of scars and fewer pollutants.
High levels of pollutants could have a negative influence on the reproduction and birthing capability of the females and might explain their premature deaths. And the newborn, unable to survive alone, would then be condemned to die. This phenomenon would thus shed light on some of the difficulties experienced by the belugas of the St. Lawrence, but only some. According to the scientists, the pollution is just one problem among many. For the past 30 years, Robert Michaud has been studying the complexities of beluga societies and their surprising loyalty to certain parts of the river. Like other researchers, he's noted that these communities, unlike other beluga populations around the world, are exposed to significant amounts of maritime traffic.
Could it be that we're too noisy and that noise interferes with communication between the mothers and their young? Is it that the mothers spend more time looking for their calves and the calves spend more time looking for their mothers, which could lead to them expending additional energy? And in the current context, perhaps that's unsustainable.
Could noise harm these belugas so much that it is contributing to their decline? A major discovery in this respect recently came out of Vancouver Aquarium. In the early 2000s, Valeria Vergara wrote a thesis on communication between belugas, these animals that live in pitch darkness for half of the year.
When we think of marine mammals, especially cetaceans, we're dealing with animals that have a profoundly acoustic experience of the world. So belugas are as acoustic as we are visual. Sound is everything to them.
Belugas use a huge range of sounds to find their food, locate openings in the ice, establish where the bank is, and avoid predators, all without light. Like bats, belugas produce series of sound waves using their melons. They travel until these hit an object or prey. These waves are then sent back as an echo, allowing the whale to determine the location, distance, speed, and size of the object ahead. Sound is critical to belugas. It's how these whales see in the dark. But sound also enables them to communicate with each other. To better understand this relationship between sound and communication, Valeria has spent thousands of hours recording belugas in the aquarium and has pinpointed one vital sound.
To discover the key function of one of the calls, and not only the function, but a function that is essential to their survival, which is that of establishing contact between mothers and calves. So to be able to associate with certainty a sound to that function was really key in our understanding of the communication system of these species.
Valeria Vergara has identified a unique sound, the function of which is to connect a mother to her calf. She calls it the contact call. Over the space of one summer in the extreme Canadian Arctic, Valeria checked the existence of this call in the natural world. The contact call is only used when a beluga is isolated from the group. It's a survival call, the first one learned by a beluga during the long process of learning to communicate.
That's a contact call. That's a contact call. A reply. There you go, another.
But it's a fragile call.
In the case of the contact call, we now suspect that mother-calf contact or acoustic contact might be getting compromised by vessel noise, and that in some circumstances this might make reunion by mothers and calves that have become separated a lot more difficult, and this can be dire for little calves.
The scientists are thus wondering if sound can affect the link between mother and calf, and if that contact between them can be broken. But to find out, one must begin by understanding the nature of their relationship. The most in-depth studies into the behavior of belugas happen here, on the Solovetsky Islands on the White Sea in Russia. It is 5 a.m. and biologist Vera Krasnova is striding out over the 2 kilometers separating her camp from a tower. For 10 weeks, Vera goes there every day. This is a unique place. The belugas swim less than 15 meters from the shore. They have a powerful attachment to this place and constantly come back here. In particular, the composition of the groups allows people to make observations here that are virtually impossible elsewhere.
This is a unique place. The distance between us and the animals is so short that we can observe all the relationships a baby has with the other members of the group from its birth up to the age of 2 or 3 months. Moreover, because we repeat our observations every year, we have discovered how the young maintain a very close link to their mothers for the first 3 years of their lives.
Vera Krasnova studies the growth of juveniles, how they eventually leave the group, the social difficulties they may have, and their capacity to overcome them through play. But above all, Vera was struck by the power of the mother-baby relationship.
We were able to observe for the first time how a mother takes care of her young. One female had a stillborn calf, and for 11 days she took it with her, pushing it to the surface to breathe. She never let it sink because she was always with it.
Roman Belikov is an acoustician. He develops hydrophones and places them on the seabed. And every summer, along with his team, he records the sounds emitted by the belugas to better understand how they communicate. For the past 20 years, Roman Belikov and the Russian scientists have developed many apparatuses to observe the animals' behavior and to listen to their communication. They try to be the least invasive as possible. They use drones, remote-controlled planes, and helium balloons equipped with cameras. In the basic cabin he shares with the other scientists, Roman Belikov analyzes the behavior of the animals recorded by all their equipment.
When we installed the sound recording equipment, our co-workers were astonished by the amazing quality of the echolocalization signals, although we didn't know what they were for. Our guess is that they use echolocalization not just to navigate or hunt, but to position themselves amongst their social group.
Over the past few years, Roman and Vera have noted a change in the behavior of the beluga whales in the Solovetsky Islands. Could this be caused by the fact that the scientists are no longer the only ones coming to observe them?
At the start of the 2000s, we focused our research on better understanding the effects of ecotourism on the animals. Unfortunately, the flow of tourists, and especially the disturbance caused by the boats, is so great that they are disturbing the behaviour of the whales to a significant extent. It could even result in a complete absence here.
If the effects of tourism and noise is being felt in the Solovetsky Islands, what does that mean for the St. Lawrence River, where big ships emit up to 180 decibels? Where there are so many pleasure boats and tourist excursions? Is noise one of the causes of death for these young whales? Scientist Nadia Ménard has come up with some unexpected correlations.
To her surprise, she discovered that in 2010 and 2012, the 2 years where the most newborn deaths were recorded, were the years when there were the highest numbers of pleasure craft and belugas at the same time. They were years when it was warm, very little wind and lots of sunshine, so lots of river tourism.
To understand the effects of noise on a mother and her calf, Robert Michaud and Valeria Vergara are heading for the Baie Sainte-Marguerite in the Saguenay Fjord, which is like a nursery for belugas.
In an area like that, with females with newborn calves, you have 10 pleasure boats coming into the middle of the herd and creating an incredibly high noise barrier. The animals stopped vocalizing completely. And that's a strategy, you know. Humans, we do the same. You don't want to scream at each other. If you're, you know, trying to talk to each other and all of a sudden a siren passes, you know, you stop talking until the noise passes and then you resume conversing. So, same thing. At that time, the animals completely stopped communicating.
Valeria and Robert work together, one with a hydrophone and the other with aerial observation. By combining sound and image, they want to see if the behavior of the whales is affected by the level of sound to which they are exposed. They want to establish whether the contact call between a mother and calf can be broken.
Oh, it's loud. Loud, loud, loud. Something's probably hiding in the mist that we can't see.
After synchronizing the sounds recorded near Tadoussac with the aerial footage, they see that the noise that can be heard was coming from a ferry at the entrance to the Saguenay Fjord, an area through which the belugas are obliged to swim.
We're a kilometre above the ferry line, and we can hear it very clearly. Valeria described it as like entering a dark tunnel. For us, it's a decision that we would weigh up and evaluate the risk. A dark tunnel where you can't see anything, or where you can't hear anything if you're a beluga. The noise of the passing ships has an impact on their behaviour.
Valeria Vergara also notes that the calls of the young belugas are in a similar frequency to those of the ferry. That's why the communication between mother and calf is so vulnerable to the noise. Are the newborns getting lost because of the noise? This hypothesis remains to be confirmed, but the researchers are worried about the impact of this frequent loss of contact. And why are increasing numbers of juvenile belugas being found isolated in ports after losing contact with a pod? Their need for socialization pushes them to make contact with humans. But belugas in such situations don't usually survive. Noise is a significant stress factor in the environment around St. Lawrence. Similar observations have been made in the Cook Inlet in Alaska, where another population of belugas is fighting for survival. Cook Inlet borders Anchorage. Biologist Manuel Castellotti has measured the multiple sources of noise surrounding this population, particularly that generated by the airport, the fourth biggest in the world in terms of freight.
What I'm showing here is an airplane, a commercial airplane flying over the whale that had the tag, and the whale was probably 30 or 40 meters below the water, and the plane was flying over that whale, getting to the airport. So you see this signature here corresponds to the plane arriving, just passing over the whale, and then leaving the area where the whale was. And I'm going to play this so you can hear it. So the problem with this type of noise is that even if it's only a few seconds, it would only affect the behavior of the whale for a little bit. The problem is that planes overflying Cook Inlet are happening, in the probably 50 to 100 planes per day. So you have very short, acute noise occurrence, but it's happening many times through the day. So it's accumulation of potential disturbance that could affect the success for feeding, or success for socializing, or mating, or group cohesion, or mother-calf communication. So even if it's short, because it's happening very often, it could be very problematic.
Although noise may be a problem, it is not the only threat facing the belugas here. The increase of salinity of the water in some parts of Cook Inlet is disturbing the habitat of the salmon. And salmon is the main source of food for belugas. Is food playing a role in the decline of the belugas, whether in Cook Inlet or in the St. Lawrence River? Scientists are wondering. A study carried out in Bristol Bay could provide some answers to this question. Bristol Bay is a large bay in the southwestern part of Alaska, open onto the Bering Sea. 3,000 belugas live here in a healthy, growing population. For more than a decade, scientists have been traveling here to study them. With the support of local guides, Manuel Castellotti is carrying out research into acoustics and their link to the belugas' feeding. He's joined by audiometry expert Aran Mooney and Russ Andrews, a specialist in telemetric tags.
Go around there's a big, huge mud flat here, so go around it and then up into the river, and hopefully we'll find a whole bunch of belugas just waiting to be tagged.
The boat set sail as soon as the weather allows.
My main interest is the feeding behavior of these beluga whales. And so we have this group of Rod and Manol, Aaron and Lori and I that are all interested in the movements and the feeding behavior of these whales. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by putting on biotelemetry instruments.
The team of scientists must find belugas close to the shore in shallow water, and then capture the animal without manhandling it. It's a particularly tricky operation. Then a full medical is taken, with a battery of blood tests, measurements, exhalation and skin samples, and biopsies. The scientists spend several hours a day in this freezing water at 2 degrees Celsius, and must work with the tides and the animals.
The tide is coming in right now. And so if the water gets too high, it's really hard to control the whale because he thinks he can just swim free, and he'll wag his tail really hard, and he's way more powerful than all of us together. But if he can feel a little bit of pressure on his belly, then he's much more likely to just relax and wait for the tide, since that's something that happens to them.
Bristol Bay has become a huge laboratory for collecting data.
Yeah, this is the last one, 30 seconds.
But the scientists are also using this population to develop new tools to better understand the relationship between the echolocalization sounds the belugas make and their feeding. They're trying to establish whether the belugas are eating well or badly. The study is based on what they call the terminal buzz, the sound emitted by the belugas when they're hunting.
We're pretty sure that when these guys are echolocating, they make slow clicks as they're trying to find the fish, and just before, as the fish is getting closer and closer to them, the click train gets faster and faster until it goes click, 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 and it's a buzz then. And that buzz tells us they're almost about to catch the fish. But we want to confirm that, in fact, that really does happen, and the way that we can do that is by putting in the stomach temperature pill.
The thermometer indicates the size of the prey. Because belugas are warm-blooded mammals, their stomach temperature lowers when they ingest their prey. The bigger it is, the lower the temperature. The thermometer is linked to a permanent transmitter that records temperature variations in the stomach along with the whale's location. But it only uploads information via satellite when the animal is on the surface. A second transmitter records the echolocation sounds the beluga makes, the clicks it sends to its prey, and the echoes sent back. It also records its movements, accelerations, speed, and depth. That beacon fixed to the animal's body using suction pads is temporary and only functions for 48 hours.
That's the stomach temperature pill. This is the transmitting device, and then this is a little natural rubber U-shaped thing to make it less likely in the beginning until this epoxy that's holding this string on breaks, and then the whole thing will fall apart and she'll be able to spit it out really quickly. So right now we're going to get ready. We're going to insert this into the stomach of the whale, and then we're going to attach the satellite tag, and then we'll be off in business. That'd be great to hear.
The scientists now have around 48 hours to find the temporary transmitter, the key element in this study into the beluga's eating habits. Without it, it is impossible to determine if the terminal buzz indicates a successful hunt. It's a race against the clock. Once it falls in the water, the transmitter will only emit signals for a limited time and within a limited area.
What we think we could do is if some of the transmitters will float up on the mud flats as the tide is dropping, leaving the transmitter exposed on the mud, and then we think we could hover over it, drop down, and I could just step out and pick it up. So we'll see.
The tides, the channels, and the mudflats mean that the scientists don't always find the transmitters.
Yeah, good job, Neil. Well done. Excellent job.
The long-term aim of the study is clear. A simple hydrophone would allow them to identify the sound emitted by the belugas when they feed. As such, the researchers, both in Cook Inlet and the St. Lawrence River, would then easily be able to determine if the belugas are eating well or badly in their habitat, and if the sounds created by human activity are disturbing their feeding. The reason why so much effort is being put into understanding how successful the belugas are at hunting is because the issue of their feeding is at the heart of the problem. The Maurice Lamontagne Institute on the banks of the St. Lawrence is home to the top specialists on this river and its fish resources in particular.
There is information that leads us to believe that the belugas' food supplies may have decreased over time. Belugas eat all kinds of things, but they depend a great deal on deep water fish. We know that deep water fish stocks underwent a massive decline during the 1990s, and that quantity of food was never replaced by anything else.
Since 1992, various regulations have been introduced to prevent the overfishing, which so reduced stocks in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But the stocks of fish that is potential food for the belugas are struggling to reach their former levels. Maybe because in addition to this particular situation, another more global and widespread phenomenon is being felt: environmental evolution caused by climate change. The whole ecosystem must adapt, prey and predator alike.
There are things that are changing in the environment. The habits of prey may change, and they may no longer be found in the same places or in the same abundance. So the belugas might have to travel farther and change their habits too, in order to find enough to eat. And they might not be 100% successful. And if there's not as much food as there used to be, that's an additional stress upon the animals.
What is the effect of climate change on the belugas and on their food in particular? To find out, one must understand the habits of the whales in the St. Lawrence River. Year after year, Robert Michaud travels up and down the river to study their behavior. He follows their movements and identifies them. His photo identification work enables him to better understand the link that binds them to their seasonal habits.
3:30 p.m. up to 3:80. Photo of a group of two whites. There's a big gash out of one of them.
Robert Michaud has noted an amazing loyalty among each beluga community to their summer residents.
Here you can see the entire history of Miss Frontenac on this page. Here is the first encounter in 2004. And in 2015, Miss Frontenac was accompanied by a bleuvet, a young calf. You can also reconstruct her history by mapping all the sightings of Miss Frontenac since she was born in 2004 through to 2016. And you can see the outline of her territory, which corresponds exactly to that of the Saguenay pod. We can see that our female here has almost never been spotted along the south bank within the limits of the south bank pod.
But in the fall, the mystery deepens. Where do the belugas go? Do they head east, towards the Gulf of St. Lawrence for the winter? How far do they go? The researchers are able to follow some of the migration towards the Gulf, but they don't see all the whales. Some are missing. Where are they? And above all, what happens in winter? Are the belugas more affected during this season than in summer? Is it harder for them to find food? In 2016, to try to answer these questions, Robert Michaud and Véronique Lesage took inspiration from the techniques developed by the Americans in Bristol Bay. For 6 weeks, they try to attach transmitters in order to study the belugas' winter movements and discover the zones where they feed. But in the St. Lawrence River, it's out of the question to capture any of the animals, given the fragility of the population. The transmitters need to be fixed remotely. It's a very tricky operation.
We're focusing on whales no further than 7 meters from the boat, which is very close. It's outside of their comfort zone.
And the target is the beluga's small dorsal fin, an area 20 centimeters by 7.
Okay, he's come by. He's good. We're still a little too far out. Move in a little. He's starting to come up. They've gone.
They need to be very patient. Days go by without even firing a single shot. The transmitters don't last long enough to deliver all the information they want. But the researchers were nonetheless able to follow the movements of the St. Lawrence belugas for several weeks.
The animals seem to be going further than I'd thought along the estuary. Almost as far as we think they go in summer and in a few hours. Back up to the places where we initially tagged them. It's very interesting. We don't have much data, but their movements are very interesting to see.
Their winter migration and its consequences remain unknown. But changes observed in the river, mainly the shrinking ice, suggest that the effects of the winter on the belugas are real.
We're heading for another winter without ice, another exceptional winter. This summer, the temperature of the water in the estuary was higher than we've ever seen before, more than 8 degrees centigrade. No ice on the riverbank. We haven't had an ice dune for a decade now. These changes are truly phenomenal.
Winter after winter, the ice covering on the St. Lawrence River and Gulf is shrinking. In 1994, the Maurice Lamontagne Institute estimated the quantity of ice at 60 cubic kilometers. In 2010, it was 8.
If the ice is disappearing from the beluga's winter habitat, it's difficult to imagine the consequences. But because one of the roles of the ice seems to be as a shelter during winter, and also maybe as a store cupboard, or a place where they know they can easily find food, it's possible that there is a significant long-term energy cost. It's possible that the fragile equilibrium of a population living on the edges of their usual territory could be upset.
In the St. Lawrence River, it's all about understanding the balance between an animal and its environment. Michael Scarra, researcher into biological and chemical oceanography at the Maurice Lamontagne Institute, has spent the last 25 years analyzing the waters off the coast of Rimouski. His measurements have provided him with a fairly clear picture of how the river's changing.
The oceanographic environment in the St. Lawrence is changing. We have good indications of this happening, of increasing temperatures in the bottom water, of increasing nutrients that are being brought into the system, of long-term changes over the space of the last decade or two in terms of the composition of the plankton community. These changes are not yet large, but there is a trend. Will that trend persist? Is it a cycle? There's a question mark there. And what the effects of that are going to be in the long run on the beluga whale, there's a question mark there as well.
What is happening to the belugas in the river isn't unique to this population. It's just that they are the first white whales to be affected by the changes that are happening in the Arctic. The reasons why the St. Lawrence belugas are in decline could be many. Climate change, food, noise, and pollution are some of the main problems facing this species, whose very existence is under threat. Which raises a big question. Are the St. Lawrence belugas on the brink of extinction? Using the results of recent research, the Canadian scientists, with the help of American and European researchers, have defined an action plan to save the belugas of the St. Lawrence River.
The model shows that despite the significant effects of climate change and the melting ice on the whale population, by working to reduce contamination and noise, and to increase sources of food, we can reverse the trend and help them re-establish themselves. If we work on just one of these stress factors, we won't succeed. But it is becoming clear that if we work on all three at the same time, we may be successful.
The effects of action taken today to protect the belugas won't be seen for a century. It's only in 100 years' time that we will be able to say if we did the right thing or not. When you're working in conservation, when you think about conservation, you shouldn't be thinking about tomorrow. You should be thinking about the future, a future that's a long time away. These animals have lived in the St. Lawrence River for at least 10,000 or 12,000 years, and their survival is threatened by our behavior today. But what we do today can guarantee them a future for decades to come.
Belugas today are one of the best indicators of the evolution of the Arctic. Just like canaries can warn miners that their environment is deteriorating, the canary of the seas can warn us that ours is too.